would you say if I told you you could have had the RB1, 2, 3, and 4, as well as 3 top 10 wide receivers on your 2023 fantasy football team? Oh yeah, you could have also had the top tight end, defense, and kicker, as well as a top 4 overall quarterback. How could you have possibly had such a super team, you ask? Let me show you. What is going on, Headliner Nation? Hopefully everyone is doing well out there today. And with the 2023 fantasy football season all but over, I wanted to take some time here today to go back and look at 2 of the best teams that you possibly could have drafted last season. Now, I have no doubt, had you drafted either one of these teams exactly, you walked away with a fat stack of cash or a fantasy football championship. But I know with the season over, a lot of people are missing some of that fantasy excitement. But what if I told you you could go out there right now and draft a team using nothing but the players left in the NFL playoffs? Well, you absolutely can do that right now over on Underdog. You can choose to draft a team just for the wild card round. You can get yourself a little bit spicy and pick one for the entire playoffs. Drafts start as low as $3 all the way up to tournaments that have over $200,000 in prizes. But you need to head over to Underdog right now to get into the action. Maybe you don't have an Underdog account just yet. Don't worry, now is the time to do so. It's super simple, only takes a couple minutes. So go ahead and head over to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app. Create a new account and use the referral code Headliners when you do so. By doing that, you're going to get your initial deposit matched all the way up to $100. But not only that, you're going to have a chance to compete against us because we're going to start dropping links here now throughout the remainder of the NFL playoffs. Plus, Kyle's actually going to be doing some live streams here pretty soon and live drafting some of these teams, and you don't want to miss out on that. But all right, let's go ahead and get back to these teams that we want to talk about here today. Now, I know a lot of people out there, whether they're content creators or just players of fantasy football, they think that there's some secret formula to winning. But honestly, any strategy has a chance to win. There isn't a secret formula to follow. Some people like to draft running backs early. Others like to draft wide receivers early. And honestly, both ways could have won you a fantasy football championship in 2023. So as we dive into these 2 teams, let me tell you the parameters that I used. All of this is in half PPR scoring, and I used their statistical numbers from weeks 1 through 17. Why didn't I include week 18? Not every player plays week 18, plus 95% of fantasy football leagues end after week 17. But I also used realistic ADP, and I feel like that's the only way to do this exercise. I can't have a team with Christian McCaffrey and Tyreek Hill both on it because they were both drafted in the first round. You don't get 2 picks in the first round. But after we go through these 2 teams, I want you to leave a comment down below. Which one of these teams do you like better? The wide receiver early or the running back early? It'll be very interesting to see what people's thoughts are after this show. So let's go ahead. Let's start off with wide receiver early. So let's go ahead and build out this wide receiver early roster. This is definitely a way that a draft could have gone had we been able to see the future. In the first round, we go CeeDee Lamb. He finished as the overall wide receiver 1, averaging over 19 fantasy points per game. In the second round, you could have gotten Amon-Ra St. Brown, the wide receiver 3 overall in the season, who averaged 16.5 fantasy points per game. In the third, maybe that's when you went running back. Joe Mixon was a little bit of a discount here this season. He ended as the running back 7 overall. In the fourth, that's where Keenan Allen was sitting. We all know how hot Keenan Allen started off this season, and even though he struggled with injuries down the stretch, he still finished as the wide receiver 8 overall. But then in the fifth, we went back to the running back position with Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He ended the running back 5 overall in the season, averaging 14 fantasy points per game. Then we go to the 6th round. This is where you could have gotten Michael Pittman. And we all know that Pittman was probably one of the most solid and consistent fantasy wide receivers on the season, finishing as wide receiver 16 overall. That's not bad because on this team, he was their wide receiver 4 and a player on the bench. Not bad at all. In the 6th round, Tight end David Njoku, he finished as the tight end 5 overall, averaging 10 fantasy points per game. Then we went to a quarterback in the 8th round. A lot of people wanted to wait a little bit later on quarterback, and if you nab Dak Prescott, he finished as the quarterback 4 overall in fantasy football this season. Then the 9th, you're looking for more running back depth. You had Raheem Mostert staring you directly in the face. We all know what Raheem Mostert did this season. 20 plus touchdowns, finished as the RB2 overall, averaging 17 fantasy points per game. Then in the 10th round, let's take a stab on a rookie tight end. There were some high profile rookie tight ends this season. Sam Laporta sitting there in the 10th round. He ended up as the tight end 1 overall in fantasy, averaging 11.6 points per game. Then in the 11th, we're starting to add some depth. I talked about Nico Collins all offseason. You could have gotten him in the 11th round. He finished as the wide receiver 17 and would be the 5th wide receiver on this team alone. How about then we go to Puka Nacua in the 12th, another high upside rookie that gained steam later in the offseason. He finished as the wide receiver 6. All of a sudden, the depth at wide receiver on this team is absolutely redonkulous. Then in the 13th round, you went back-to-back Ram. You got Kyren Williams. A lot of people forgot about Kyren Williams here this offseason, and after Cam Akers was no longer in the equation, Kyren Williams went the hell off, finished as the running back 4 on the season. Then in the 14th and the 15th, when we tell everyone to go with their defense and kicker, you could have gotten the Ravens in the 14th, the number 1 overall defense, and Brandon Aubrey, the kicker of the Dallas Cowboys, yes, who finished as the number 1 kicker overall in fantasy football, and who's averaged almost 11 fantasy points per game. That's great from the kicker position. Now, obviously, given all these draft picks, you had a few of those later round guys that outperformed the earlier round guys. That's going to happen almost every single year. But if you take the average points scored for this team from top to bottom, I'm talking about including the bench players as well, they averaged a total of 221.8 fantasy points per game each and every week for your fantasy roster. That is a huge number. Now, obviously, you don't start everyone, right? But with the optimal lineup, you're looking at over an average of 140 fantasy points per contest. This team absolutely dominates all year long. Even when you look at guys like Keenan Allen, who was drafted a little bit earlier, once he went down, you're definitely slotting in like a Puka Nacua, and you're not losing much. This team, solid from top to bottom. Anyone who would have drafted this exact team probably walked away with a fantasy football championship. But what I really love about it is it's full of guys that we talked about wanting all offseason. Raheem Mostert, he was listed as a sleeper for us here this offseason. CeeDee Lamb, he was a must-have wide receiver. Keenan Allen was definitely somebody we loved at a huge discount this year. Michael Pittman, he was pushed at a great value. How about Nico Collins? Like I just said, I talked about Nico like last May, saying this is the guy we want in Houston. Then Joe Mixon, he was a huge discount last season, and we told people not to avoid him at that price. Just a great overall squad, a realistic squad overall. But maybe like me, maybe you prefer to go running back early. Now, what team could we have built with a early running back strategy? Now, obviously, from rounds like 9 or 10 on, these teams are going to be super similar. It's the first 9 rounds that are going to look a lot different. And really, I think that's kind of obvious, right? Because in order to nail a super team, you have to nail the picks in the double-digit rounds. And the guys that we just discussed from like rounds 9 on were the league-winning players at that position. So let's look and see what this team would look like. Let me know if you like it or not. In the first round, Christian McCaffrey at the running back position finished as the overall RB1 and averaged over 22 fantasy points per game, was on a ton of championship rosters here this past season. In the second round, remember, we're going running back heavy. Well, we're staring right now at Travis Etienne. He finished just over 15 fantasy points per game and was the overall running back 3. In the third round, though, no, we didn't go wide receiver. We nabbed Lamar Jackson, who finished the season as the overall quarterback 3, averaging just over 21 fantasy points per game. But now, let's take a look at a wide receiver. In the fourth round, you could have got DJ Moore, the overall wide receiver 7 on the season, who averaged 14.4 fantasy points per game. In the fifth, you went with the old vet. You went with Mike Evans. And how many people were surprised by the production of Mike Evans? I was not surprised. We talked about the potential of that all offseason. He finished as the wide receiver 4, averaging 15 fantasy points per game. In the 6th round, we're looking at David Montgomery. A lot of people didn't know what to expect from DeMont after they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs, but we knew with Jamaal Williams leaving, there was going to be a role there. In the 6th round, it was worth the gamble. Then in the 7th round, we had David Njoku once again at the tight end position. The 7th round last year for fantasy football, overall, looking back at it now, pretty freaking disgusting. In the 8th round, we went with Brian Robinson, a guy who we expected to get a lot of volume, and honestly, even though it doesn't sound sexy, even now that the season is over, Brian Robinson finished as the RB12 overall on the season. Then in the 9th, Raheem Mostert, once again, the running back 2 overall. And then we can see how this bench filled out exactly the same as the other team, right? We went with Nico Collins in the 11th, Puka Nacua in the 12th, Kyren Williams in the 13th, then the Ravens in the 14th, Brandon Aubrey in the 15th. Now, just like the wide receiver early team, a lot of guys on the running back team on the bench outperformed the guys that maybe we drafted a little bit earlier. But once again, if you take the average points scored from this team, top to bottom, once again, including the bench, it's 222.6 fantasy points per week. Comes out to be, once again, an average of over 100 fantasy points per game. But really, the only difference between running backs and wide receivers is a difference of 0.8 fantasy points per contest. They're super, super close. But this team also stacked with players that we talked this offseason: Mike Evans, Raheem Mostert, Nico Collins, DJ Moore. A lot of people wanted to avoid DJ Moore altogether, and with the start of the season, a lot of people panicked, but he really picked it up second half of the season, finished super high. Wide receiver 7, right? Travis Etienne was a must-have for us this offseason. David Montgomery talked about, him feeling that Jamaal Williams role. Either way, though, it doesn't matter if you went running back earlier or wide receiver earlier. If you had one of these teams, you won a fantasy title. I'm almost sure of it. But okay, after going through both teams, what did we learn here today? And honestly, I think there's 2 big things that we learned. The first thing, you gotta nail the late rounds in your fantasy football drafts. And if I'm being completely honest, I feel that's an area in which we excel at here on this channel. It's those late round finds that we're looking for. And secondly, you can win going wide receiver early. You can win going running back early. It doesn't really matter. Not one strategy is better than the other. You just have to pick the right guys. The best strategy for fantasy football is selecting the best damn players each and every year. All right, but now that we've gone through each one of these teams, which one of them did you like better? The wide receiver early or the running back early? Honestly, on the surface, the sexiness goes to the wide receiver early team, right? The bigger names kind of stand out a little bit more, but it's the running back overall team that not only scored a smidgen more points, but it also was absolutely stacked with production. It was actually the running back team that has the RB 1, 2, 3, and 4. They also have 3 top 10 wide receivers, a top 3 quarterback, and the number 1 overall tight end, kicker, and defense. And it all could have been done using realistic ADP. So what that tells me is it's time to get to work here this NFL offseason so we can try to nail one of these teams in 2024. I'm looking forward to the offseason content. Hopefully you are as well. There is a reason why we get thousands of comments after week 17 and 18 with people sharing their championship stories. Because when you watch all offseason, the in-season success just comes along with it. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of here for the day. Hopefully you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and then most importantly, do your part to make the world a better place.